Well, hello and welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the last part of lecture two. This is the final stage of it, where we're going to look at certainly the economic and social policies of the presidents which came after Nixon. So I think it's only fair that I give you a little brief, quick description of the presidents that took over, perhaps from Nixon and right the way up until we come across Reagan and his policies, or Reaganomics, as it was termed. So simply put, after Nixon resigns, rather than face impeachment by the American nation, we have to appreciate the president that came after him, okay? And he's the only unelected vice president and actual president. So this shows that even though a presidency, this is something that does amaze me, the vice president is there should anything happen, whether it's death, impeachment, or simple inability to preside, to be the president of America. This is why they have a vice president, and we see a perfect example of how an unelected person of presidency can become president. So this is Gerald Ford, and he's the 38th president of the United States. He kicks in, as you will know. The Watergate scandal really comes into play by 1972. In 1974, it's played its part. The 5 Watergate burglars, they've been put on trial. Evidence has come to light that Nixon, although he may not have known about the Watergate break-in, he's made certain attempts to cover it up. Therefore, he's gone against the Constitution, and it's a matter of him obstructing justice. And that is really how he is put into the position where impeachment takes place, and he resigns rather than face this impeachment, where he could face a martial court. He could go to jail over this, okay? But he doesn't. He resigns for the sake of the nation, because he believes that the nation doesn't need this. So it's quite a stepping away from his responsibilities and his crime, really. But moving on, we have Gerald Ford Jr. There is another one. But we don't really need to know about that. When he comes into office, he does pardon Nixon of crimes. This makes people think that perhaps he had some sort of deal that was brokered for him to step in, but that's one of history's contentions, and that's something you really need to know for the exam. So we will move on. He pardons Nixon, and stating his quote is, "Our long national nightmare is now over." But he stresses that our Constitution works. Our great republic is a government of laws and not men, showing that the Constitution, once again, is the very backbone of America, okay, and not just one man. We shouldn't forget that. However, it doesn't instill, I think, the statistics that we looked at from the public opinion. That really is the faith in a presidency has really been massively reduced. Okay, it really has been quashed. And I think if we went back to the last slide that I showed you right at the end of the last part of the lecture 2, you will see how it drops from maybe 60% all the way down to something like 14% during this presidency, okay? US troops at this point are now moved out of Vietnam, okay? The Vietnam War is over. South Vietnam loses to North Vietnam, and the US troops are withdrawn, okay? It was a war where America's first loss as such. If we move on, Watergate had cast a shadow over presidency, okay? So Gerald Ford is not necessarily not trusted. He does do some good things. However, the people's eyes are looking from a Republic Party now to more of a Democratic Party. Okay. Again, we've gone over this. There is widespread disillusionment with all politicians, but they seem to want someone who is not going to perhaps lie to them, and perhaps I've given the game away there. So Jimmy Carter is the 39th president of the United States, and this is from 1977 to 1981. I will not lie to you, is his catchphrase. He was known as Jimmy Who because he's from the southern states of America, from Georgia actually, and not a lot of people had heard about him. I'm not saying he was a fresh face. He's still in the future years of this. He does great things with regards to the socialism and providing for the weak and the needy. But we'll continue because this is simply meant to be a brief interim overview of what happens between Watergate and the years of Reagan coming into office. However, his term of office is a disappointment. We are faced with, or they were faced with rather, economic disaster. There's oil crisis, okay? Inflation, oil crisis. It leads to serious economic problems, to lack the actual financial stability of the country, but also it lacks to the support of Jimmy Carter. His failure to gain the release of the US hostages held in Iran also sealed his defeat in 1980. We'll have a look at aspects of Iran later in other lectures because otherwise we'll drift off, but they will be included because that comes under America's influence on other parts of the world. As I mentioned prior to this, America is growing in power and influence, and other countries, other nations, other continents will have their rebellions and their revolution against democracy taking over their states or over their religions, their beliefs, okay? And this is one instance here where Iran takes hostages because they're not happy with America. But we'll go into that into further depth at a later point. Okay, so what domestic changes were brought in by Presidents Reagan, Bush Sr. and Clinton? As mentioned, one of the causes of the early 1980s recession was the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which sparked oil price increases. That was in Jimmy Carter's league. When we get to Reagan, you might recognize him. You might know that he was a Hollywood actor, starred in a lot of westerns. You'll certainly see some of his taste for theatre or the dramatic in some of his space programs, which we'll chat about later. But Reagan had inherited serious economic problems, which he decides to tackle by using his Reaganomics, okay? Now, Reaganomics, basically, I put this kind of example here, and we look at the theory first, but here's just a brief overview of it. His policy was to cut taxes for the businesses and the wealthier quarter of America, okay? These people that have a lot of financial influence. They hold the money. If you think of the triangle of the wealthy, the middle class, and the poor, it comes down into a triangular shape. So his belief, or his, I think this is also known as side supply, is that if taxes were cut from the top of financial society, then this would filter down, and it was expected that some of this money would be used for investments. The investments would promote more work by investment in machinery, new factories, new productions, and so a demand for more workers. Hence, profits would result and the federal budget would benefit from more taxes being paid. At the same time, workers and management would have more personal income to spend and so create a demand for more goods and services. So a cycle of investment and spending will be created and benefit for all. Now, all of these cycles are great. I think if you can think back to the Wall Street crash, or certainly not necessarily the Wall Street crash, but the cycle of prosperity, which we looked at the beginning of lecture 1, which was in class. I'll put that online. But there are certain underlying issues which always get in the way of this sort of circular theory, certainly when it comes to finance and world trade. But it was meant to put more money into the economy on a whole. This is known as a trickle-down effect as well. Okay, if you have this triangle, the wealthy are cut from the amount of taxes that they pay, therefore they can inject, if you will, more money into the middle classes. The middle classes then can inject more money. So it's a trickle-down theory, but it's also been given the name of Reaganomics because he strongly believed in this. Okay, so Reagan believed that if he made tax cuts at the top of society, then there would be a trickle down. Everyone would become richer. I think I've just explained this prior to showing you this animation. Therefore, the government could stop many of its social welfare programs involving transfers of payments to the poor. Again, what is evident here is Reagan is a Republican. Okay? He's asking the weaker members of society, or those that need welfare, he's stopping them and he's asking them to stand on their 2 feet, to do something about their situation, which again goes back to Hoover's rugged individualism. Okay? So Reagan cuts welfare programs, spending the actual spending of welfare programs, by over $20 billion a year in its first 3 years, including food stamps and various programs to assist struggling mothers and children, believing that they should make a difference in their own future. He slashes taxes. In 1981, the Economic Recovery Tax Act was reduced by $33 billion. He's actually asking those that have a lot of money not to pay as much taxes. Okay, to simplify this, it was the largest tax cut in history, and so much that even though he'd asked them, presuming that they would spend more of their money investing into that sort of trickle down into the sort of middle of the triangle, so that middle of the triangle, when it comes to the middle classes, would then trickle down their wealth and spend money in the lower sectors. It doesn't happen. But the very main point of this is that he's omitting the top part of the triangle, or of the wealthy and America's richest, so much that even the income revenue of America was barely collecting anything from these people who were earning massive amounts of money, okay, while still taxing the middle and the lower portion of America. Okay, so these people were not injecting or stimulating the economy with the money that he'd chosen to not tax from them. The effects of Reaganomics, we can see what I've tried to do here is it's another downward spiral, okay, if you haven't seen it coming. But without tax revenues, government could not pay for the services it provided. Even worse, Reagan increased total government spending, especially in defense of America. Okay, so not only is he bringing money in, okay, he's not bringing money in, but he's also borrowing money to make sure that America is defended correctly. And we'll see some of his defense policies or some of his defense programs, which are interesting to look at, to say the least. But because he's increasing government spending and he's not bringing in any revenue, this creates a deficit. Okay, so the government, because of this, is forced to borrow money each year, and the national debt rose to its highest ever level. People in all sectors lose their jobs. Okay, so this triangle of rich, middle, and lower classes are affected by Reaganomics, okay, where people have to lose jobs. What happens if you're in this triangle? Well, if all people have to lose their jobs, then unless they're very, very wealthy, they're going to go down the ladder. Okay, so your top part of your wealthiest people are going to move down to maybe middle class status. And likewise, your middle class status will probably move down to your lower class status. Okay, so there is a trickle down, but it's a trickling down of social status. In 1987, the Congress reject Reagan's budget for increased defence spending. They've had enough. They realise it's not working, and this then creates a collapse, if you will. Okay, so one of the most severe stock market crashes since 1929. Okay, that's Wall Street, mainly due to USA having the largest trading deficit in the world. Okay, so whatever he felt these Reaganomics were going to bring about, it didn't happen, and the country is going further and further into a deficit, into owing money rather than being able to make money. Okay, and just to reiterate that, there's the cycle there. Okay, now while President Reagan was in term of office, you have to remember the Cold War is still going on. I think I should give a quick explanation if I can. Over to the east you have Russia, which had created nuclear arms. Likewise, America had prior, and there was this space war, or arms race rather, that was going on. There was a space war to get the first man into space, first man on the moon. But we are looking at the arms war now. America over here can launch nuclear missiles. Russia over here can launch nuclear missiles. Okay, it's basically, as soon as one nation sends a nuclear missile over to the other nation, they would retaliate by sending a nuclear missile over to the other nation. Now, there was no... I mean, the whole point of this becomes redundant. There was no form of defence against a nuclear missile. These would be launched. It was simply retaliation. So an eye for an eye, if you will, which never ever works, because they just flatten both countries. So the space program was set up to advance certain methods of technology and defence that would eliminate, or rather give the possibility of one of these nations going into nuclear war but still winning. And we'll cross that later with the Star Wars program that Reagan advocates. But there's a lot of the space program technology that has been put to the test during these years. If I give you some examples here, many of them end in failures. Okay, so you have, in January, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded only seconds after liftoff, killing all 7 crew. Okay, you may have heard of that. Secondly, we have, in April, a Titan rocket carrying secret military equipment exploded immediately after liftoff. We also have a Delta rocket failed in May carrying a weather satellite. Okay, so these attempts to actually get into orbit and to create a system of defence which is above our planet, which you'll see and can be explained better in a diagram which will be shown in a later slide, which is this one actually, the Strategic Defence Initiative, the STI, Department of Defence. As you can see, very, very based upon, it was known as the Star Wars project, okay, but it's SDI. Nobody's going to criticize you for calling it the Star Wars project in your exam or an essay. It was a title that came quite familiar because of the use of this kind of science fiction approach, but doable, you know, on paper. So we'll have a little look here. This is the picture I'm talking about. Here you have Russia, and then to the west, yeah, obviously there's Europe and everything has been squashed this way. But here are the two superpowers, US and Russia, or the USSR. And basically what Reagan planned was we get all of these satellites into certain positions in the orbit, and they can monitor. And with lasers, they can take down any nuclear missile that has been launched from the USSR or anywhere perhaps in the Mediterranean Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean or what have you. These things would pick it up and we'd be able to shoot them down, very much like a Star Wars movie, very much like a James Bond movie. But yeah, the technology or the blueprints of that technology was there. This again then would lead into perhaps Russia developing their own sense of system, rather, of defense against the USA. So you can see that these things, yeah, it would have been an advantage to the Americans first and foremost. Perhaps then they would stop satellites being launched so they couldn't counteract. But this is sort of military warfare in a astrodynamic science fiction sort of realms here, but it certainly was what they were attempting to do. Okay, and I hope that picture sort of solves it better than my words do, because I'm no scientist. But if we move on, there was no more money for this kind of defense. Okay, it was you can imagine how massively expensive this would have been. Yeah, so this is where Congress says no. You know, so it falls quite flat on its face there. And unfortunately, Reagan had bigger plans. He did it, and the pulling of the money from Congress, so he couldn't spend it on defense, delayed his plans to build a permanent orbital space station. So sorry, Darth Reagan. Okay, so there's no Death Star for you. Moving on. In 1988, President Reagan is succeeded by George Herbert Walker Bush, who was the 41st President of the United States from 1989 to 1993. And he continues to follow Reagan's policies, these Reaganomics, these trickling down. Okay? But he is faced with deficits left by the Reagan years. So the policies of George Bush were the budget deficit had trebled in size between 1980 to 1990. So Bush was forced to go back on the election promises that he'd made. We'll see that in the final slide of Bush Sr.'s commentary. But when he makes his promise in speech, his opening speech, I believe it's read my lips, no more taxes, which means he won't be taxing the rich. Okay, that's basically what he's aiming to say. However, he has to go back because of this large, huge, trebled deficit. Okay, or money owed to other countries. So he has to tax the rich. Okay, so he does impose new taxes on the wealthy. Okay, and he increases indirect taxes as well on other things where you have to pay for certain luxuries. He's not just taxing you on your, in this country it would be your council tax or whatever. There are increased indirect taxes on other luxuries. So you can picture being a Republican, he's not gaining as much support as what he would like to do with the wealthy and the rugged individualists. Yeah. So the budget deficit continues to grow, and in 1992 it was calculated that 14% of all Americans lived in poverty. That's a big number there. But he did have some successes, okay, on the domestic front. Bush, a moderate conservative, okay, which means that he was, he's not a liberal as such, but he's willing to listen. So he's not absolutely cemented in his beliefs. Signed such important pieces of legislation, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. This just forbids discrimination to anyone in employment, public accommodations, and transportations. You can kind of look at this in employment. The Discrimination Act is certainly you will not be judged or merited on any disability, and likewise with all of these, really, when you come to think of public accommodations, you were looking at maybe universities, working areas, and certainly transportations. There are services or a change in facilities and accessibility that allow anyone who has a difficulty is able to attend, whether it's employment, university, schools, so much as retail as well could come into public accommodation, such as McDonald's has to have a toilet facility that is not on the top floor, and you don't have to, if you're in a wheelchair, you kind make that accessible. So, and we see it in this country as well, where, toilets, water fountains, access to computers are all provided for with the appreciation of different learning abilities and physical disabilities as well. Transportation as well. All of this allows more of a free America, or a free nation that doesn't show prejudice or lack of opportunity, if you will, towards those that should be given an equal chance of work. Public accommodations would be university, so education and transportation, travel and commerce, okay? So we'll slice that. That really is what the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 was. So it's a great thing, if you ask me. And likewise, the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. This focuses on, it's more of an environmental policy here, but still a great thing. Excuse me there while I take a sip of water. And those that know me will appreciate that. But this is an environmental policy which aims to clear up any urban smog, acid rain, and eliminating any industrial emissions that may cause harm to the planet over a long duration, but in the short term to its inhabitants, which is the American population, or people that certainly live around areas which are contaminated by industrial pollution. I think you'd probably have to look at the film Erin Brockovich would give you probably a great example of that. So moving on, those were two of Bush's successes. His failures, however, although I can't knock the man for trying, was his campaign against drugs. Okay, it didn't make much of an impact. This sort of the money that he injected, when I'm talking about several $1 billion here, into his campaign for the Drug Enforcement Agency. I know nowadays Breaking Bad is a big thing, which if you follow that, it's very, very difficult to contain the transportation of drugs, the actual appreciation or the addiction or the actual organization is probably the best word for the drug industry, okay? And although he's willing to inject several $1 billion into this kind of curtailing of this form of industry, it makes very little impact. I mean, to give further examples, this money is placed into more stringent and more stricter monitoring of customs and excising and drugs being brought into America from perhaps the cartels, the southern states, and from South America. Okay. Another thing which really shines in, well, I say shines, maybe shadows is a better word, Bush Senior's presidency is, and we'll talk about this in other lectures, the civil rights movement, okay, and the progression for civil rights on Black Americans in 1992. And this really is something that is important, because I think this is the final note when you come to, because we're studying up to 2000, this is probably one of the biggest things to actually demonstrate or emphasize or highlight that although there'd been massive breakthroughs in equality and the rights for I'd say minorities, but black civil rights especially, there were riots that kicked off during President Bush Senior's term of office. Simply put, it's a riot which is sparked from the arrest of Rodney King, a black American. During King's arrest, and he's arrested for speeding, okay? And during King's arrest, he's assaulted by police. You can call it assault. We'll see a picture of later. He's beaten, but as this already gives evidence, it's caught on camera. And because it is caught on camera, much like Nixon and McCarthy, remember the influence of television, okay? Because that's another underlying theme of America. Let's do this all in one scope, because I hadn't set up this slide. For some reason, it's gone awry. But the 4 police officers, which you saw in the prior photo, were put on trial, but were acquitted of any crime. Okay? Rodney King, as you can see, pictures there, I think, paint 1,000 words. And news of this triggered riots across Los Angeles because black Americans perceived that this was an unfair legal system. And I think quite rightly so. So police, army and Marines are called upon to restore order in Los Angeles in 92. Okay, and just to give you an overview, 53 people are killed. 2,383 are injured. It's in Los Angeles, remember. 9,000 arrested. More than 7,000 fires started. And damages to 3,100 businesses. Total financial loss lays at roughly about $1 billion American dollars. That is not the important thing, I think. Well, certainly when it comes to financial loss, but I mean, what you have here is a pocket of people who are not happy. Again, this can be stated in an argument. Certainly at this time, were they equal? Was everybody equal? Was everybody free? Was everything just? I mean, all of this is evidence that you can mount up in any argument, going back from, as we've explained, from the 1930 years, where you have the New Deal, but there are still groups of society which are not improved by these new deals. So this is just food for thought. Okay, this is the modern day, if you will, being in 2015 at the moment. But this is perhaps over 20 years ago. But still, even though America's come a long way, it hasn't solved all of its problems. And just to finalise that, perhaps the Los Angeles riots, simply for fulfillment or out of interest, but Black American community leaders pointed out that under the presidencies of Reagan and Bush Sr., the 80s and the 90s had seen a 60% cut in job training for Black Americans, an 82% cut in subsidised housing. Okay, so there's no help for the homeless there, or people who are trying to maintain their home and a job and feed their children. Again, this 60% cut in job training, certainly we can parallel that to the segregation of schools or education. So this again is worth looking at. And some of these community leaders, or representatives of the Black community, or Black American community rather, it allowed them to give the voice to say that the presidents did not want to solve the problem of Black poverty by taxing white Americans. Okay? And I think that when you're facing a 60% cut in job training, that, I mean, yes, the 82% in the housing is quite influential, but the 60% cut in job training, that doesn't allow for anybody to progress in life. I mean, that's you know, similar to cutting schooling, cutting any opportunity, any chance of advancement, or even having any stability or any hope of succeeding in a position in life. Okay, so that's just something. And to finish on this, in 1990, 50% of all Black American children lived below the poverty line. So, oh, sorry, I thought of one. And the mortality rate was 19%, higher than in some developing world countries. Okay, so both of the, well, all of the points here, I hope, provide you with some sort of information or some sort of opportunity to develop your own opinion on the policies of the Republican presidents of Reagan and Bush Sr. and how they had an impact. Nowadays, well, I say nowadays, this is taken from 2012, we see the percentage in poverty for all statistics. There seems to be almost, well, I'd say almost. Here's the largest one here. So a female householder, a Black American female householder, no husband, with related children under 18 years of age, is still, call it 50%. Yeah. Anyway, food for thought there. However, by going back on his pledge in his acceptance speech, that was probably why, or that took a heck of an influence when it came to him not being re-elected, and he is then replaced by Bill Clinton. Now, just to mention a few things of Bill Clinton, he's a Democrat. And under his presidency, America enjoyed an era of peace and prosperity. Unemployment was decreased. Crime and the budget surplus, okay, or the deficit. The deficit was improved, and there became a surplus. Okay, so there was more money to spend. However, Clinton is shadowed or muddied by a set of scandals, and you might not know the first one, but maybe some of you will know and appreciate the second one. PowerPoint's gone mad on me. So he moves away from Reaganomics anyway. And Clinton was a Democrat, as I've said, so he holds very different views. The annual budget grew to $29 billion in 1992 by the end of Bush Sr.'s term. Okay, so he wishes to reduce the budget deficit and increase spending and investment on education and welfare. Here we can see the democratic nature of Clinton's presidency, because he wants to help those that are not in power but need welfare. So I say simply put, but just to give this kind of quick, because I know talking about economic policies can sound, although I've been told off not to say boring, but if we put it down in a simple way, whereas you had perhaps Reagan and Bush thinking, right, we'll spend money and then we'll bring it back because we'll become in Reagan's instance, we'll become the best armed or the most defended country, and that way then we have power. Likewise with Bush, look, we'll allow the rich to not pay as much taxes, and we hope that they'll filter that money back into the economy, and that way it'll trickle down and it'll reach the lower classes. No, Clinton has a discipline when it comes to spending, and it's tough and sometimes unpopular choices. And by that I mean, not going for defence and not allowing the wealthiest to remain tax exempt. Okay, and this then allows him to balance the budget, because I'm taking more money off the wealthy, and I'm sure you can appreciate that. If you only earn well, here's another thing we'll cross. I was going to say minimum wage, but this is something that Clinton brings in. 10% of £140,000 a year compared to 10% of £6,500 a year. You can see the maths there. The actual bring in of the taxes does put a lot more into the pot to help society. Okay, so these tough and unpopular choices were made by Clinton, and he makes legislation on this in 1993. And in 1993, this lowers the deficit to $107 billion. Okay, and in 1997. He manages to balance the budget. So he's brought that down from, I think it was 229 billion, or it's up there, to 107. And 4 years later, he's balancing the budget through this disciplinary action or measures of spending. He rewards work and encourages communities. So his rewarding of work was to raise the minimum wage. There's a set amount of money which people will get up, and they are entitled to have X amount of money for doing a certain type of job, and that's great. He also provides childcare and healthcare to help those who need this support, right? And he also supports specialized financial institutions serving often overlooked customers and communities. In other words, he's not just funding the big industrialists, right? He's not just funding the big companies, okay? He's actually looking at people or providing money to institutions that can notice independent or local communities. And this is something where, we see with evidence here how this does generate and can balance a budget, okay? So these things have worked. However, his health security bill, and when I talk about that, which he tries to pass, is a universal health insurance. He's trying to provide, like an NHS, you're entitled to free health insurance, and we can set up hospitals, and that way then you won't have to pay for your medical treatment. This is rejected by Congress, and this simply is rejected by Congress because the bigger businesses who hold the power and are making the money out of medicine, they aren't going to play. Okay, so that is just rejected, and there's perhaps further work for you to look into if something like that interests you. Now, the scandals are something that really do cast a shadow over Clinton in his presidency, okay? And again, we are going to face something kind of like Nixon, but it's impeachment, okay? So anyway, the first one that Clinton was linked to, and maybe you might know about the second one when I go into that, but the first one, Clinton was linked to the Whitewater scandal of 1996, okay? And this is just basically linking him to two former business partners, which he had in Arkansas, and they were convicted of fraud over a house in development. They tried to tag him into it or link him into it, okay? Whoa. PowerPoint is playing havoc. But there is no conclusive evidence ever found there, okay, to tie him into that. Now, during Clinton's second term, the US economy was healthy, unemployment was low, and the nation experienced a major technological boom and the rise of the internet, okay? So things are looking quite swimming. Clinton helped broker a peace accord in Northern Ireland. Okay, so he's a thumbs up there, thumbs up there. The same year, America launched air attacks against Iraq's nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons program. So we can give him a thumb up for that, okay? Even though it's a bit dominating from America's part, but there we go. In 1999, the United States led a NATO effort to end ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. So, you know, he's keeping the world affairs quite afloat here, yeah? Oh, but by the way, Bill is married. I forgot to mention this, and you might know of this, okay? So Bill is married, yeah? But not to this lady. Bill, and still is married to Hillary Clinton, okay? This lady is Monica Lewinsky, who's a former White House intern to United States President Bill Clinton. Okay? Bill denies all allegations of any affair or relationships that were taking place with Monica, even though Monica has chatted to her friends about this, and she's a lot younger than Bill. Not that matters. So this causes distress, okay? So the media debated whether or not an affair had occurred and whether or not Clinton had lied or obstructed justice. Monica testifies against Clinton and produces evidence which causes distress. Because of strenuously denying his affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky, Clinton was later impeached by the House of Representatives for lying about the matter under oath. And there we have the end of Lecture 2. Okay, I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you guys soon.